Okay, so today we're diving into something that I think hits a little too close to home for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's the fear of being kicked out of your home.
Right.
We're talking wrongful eviction,
Yes.
a situation that is honestly way more common than a lot of people think, and honestly pretty terrifying.
It really is. And the scary part is that a lot of people don't even realize they have rights when it comes to eviction.
Exactly.
They just assume that the landlord has all the power.
And that's why we're doing this deep dive.
Absolutely.
You've shared some legal guides articles and FAQs specifically focusing on California tenant rights.
Yes.
So we're going to try to cut through all that legalese and give people the information that they actually need if they ever find themselves in this, honestly, pretty nightmare scenario.
Excellent way to put it. We're aiming for clarity and practicality here.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So first things first, what exactly makes an eviction wrongful?
Okay.
Is it just about a landlord being a jerk, or is there like a legal definition?
Yeah, so it's definitely not just about a landlord's personality, you know. Wrongful eviction means any attempt to remove a tenant that doesn't follow the very strict procedures outlined in California law.
Okay.
Think of it like a recipe.
Okay.
There's a specific order of ingredients and steps you have to follow.
So even if a tenant is behind on rent, the landlord can't just change the locks on a whim?
Nope, not even close.
Really?
That's actually a common misconception. Even if there's a valid reason for eviction, like consistently late rent or something,
Right.
there's a whole process the landlord must go through.
Okay.
And those steps are spelled out very clearly in our sources.
So what kind of steps are we talking about?
Well, for starters, there are very specific notice requirements.
Okay.
The landlord has to serve the tenant with a notice to pay rent or quit giving them a certain amount of time to either catch up on payments or vacate the premises. And those notices have to be delivered in a legally valid way, like personal service or posting on the door with mailing.
So they can't just slip a note under the door?
No, not at all. And the required time frame for these notices is very specific too, depending on the reason for the eviction.
Oh.
It can range from 3 days to 30 days or even longer in some cases.
Wow. So timing matters. Method of delivery matters.
It does.
It's all starting to feel a little bit more complicated than just you didn't pay, get out.
Exactly. And even if those notices are done correctly, there are still limitations on what a landlord can do.
Oh, wow.
Our sources actually detail some pretty shocking tactics that would constitute wrongful eviction.
Like what?
Things like changing the locks without proper notice, you know?
Oh, wow.
Shutting off utilities to force someone out, or even trying to make the place so horrible that a tenant feels they have to leave.
Oh, my gosh.
That's called constructive eviction.
I didn't realize that was even a thing. Isn't that illegal?
Absolutely illegal. And it really underscores why understanding your rights is so crucial.
Yeah.
You can't fight back against something if you don't know what's wrong in the first place.
That's so true. So much of this feels like it hinges on tenants actually knowing what they're entitled to.
Yes.
So what are some examples of those rights that you mentioned?
Well, in California, there's a strong emphasis on just cause eviction.
Okay.
This means a landlord can't just kick you out for any reason they please. There has to be a legally valid reason.
So just cause being things like not paying rent or violating a lease agreement.
Exactly. But even then, they have to follow that strict process we talked about.
Right.
Proper notices, proper timelines, no sneaky tactics. And on top of that, there are additional layers of protection for tenants in certain situations.
Like what?
Well, for starters, many cities in California have rent control ordinances.
Right.
These laws limit how much landlords can raise rent each year,
Okay.
and often require just cause for evictions, even if the lease term has expired.
So it's not just about non-payment or lease violations.
Right.
The landlord has to have a really solid reason to evict in those rent-controlled units.
That's right.
So rent control can actually make it harder for landlords to get rid of tenants, even if those tenants are breaking the rules.
In a way, yes. It's meant to protect tenants from being unfairly displaced, especially in areas where housing costs are already sky high.
Right. That makes sense. And what about that other thing you mentioned earlier, the Ellis Act? I always hear about that in the news.
Right. The Ellis Act is a whole other ballgame. It essentially allows landlords to exit the rental market entirely,
Okay.
to stop renting their units altogether.
So even if a tenant is doing everything right, paying rent on time following the lease, they could still be evicted under the Ellis Act.
They could.
That seems kind of harsh.
It's definitely disruptive. And it's understandable why people feel that way. But even under the Ellis Act, tenants have rights and protections.
Okay.
The process is highly regulated with strict notice requirements and very specific timelines.
So it's not like a landlord can just slap an Ellis Act sticker on the building and everyone's out on the street?
Not at all. There are specific legal steps they have to follow. And tenants have recourse if those steps aren't followed correctly. In fact, our sources emphasize that one of the most important things a tenant can do in any eviction situation is to immediately seek legal counsel.
Okay, I'm sensing a theme here. If anything seems off or weird about an eviction, get a lawyer involved.
ASAP.
You got it. Early legal intervention can be the difference between losing your home and successfully defending your rights.
Wow.
An experienced attorney will know the ins and outs of California's tenant protection laws and can help you navigate the often complex legal system.
Right. It's a lot.
It is.
So we've been throwing around a lot of terms like just cause and constructive eviction and the Ellis Act.
Yeah.
I bet some listeners are feeling a little overwhelmed. What's like the one thing you'd want them to remember from this first part of our deep dive?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think the most important takeaway is this. In California, you have rights as a tenant.
Yes.
You don't have to just passively accept an eviction notice. You have legal options and resources available to help you fight back.
Yeah.
And the sooner you reach out for help, the better. Amazing advice. Knowledge really is power in this situation.
It really is.
All right, so we're back and ready to get practical.
Yes.
In that first part of our deep dive, we established that California has really strong tenant protection laws.
Right.
But, those laws only work if you know how to use them.
Exactly. It's like having a toolbox full of amazing tools,
right,
but not knowing how to use any of them.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So let's open up that toolbox.
Okay.
What are the concrete steps that someone should take if they find themselves facing a potential eviction?
First and foremost, don't panic.
Okay.
Easier said than done, I know.
Right.
But it's essential to stay calm and think strategically.
Right, because freaking out is probably not going to help anyone's legal case.
Exactly. Instead, take a deep breath and remember what we discussed earlier. Documentation is your best friend.
Okay, back to that trusty paper trail. So what kind of documentation are we talking about specifically?
Everything related to your tenancy. Start with your lease agreement. Make sure you have a copy and that you understand all the terms and conditions.
Right, because that's like the contract outlining everyone's rights and responsibilities.
Precisely. Next, gather all your rent receipts, canceled checks, bank statements that prove you've been paying rent on time. This is crucial for refuting any claims of non-payment.
So even if you think you're the perfect tenant, always keep those payment records organized just in case.
Absolutely. And don't forget about any communication with your landlord, emails, text messages, letters, even handwritten notes.
Wow.
All of it can be valuable evidence.
Especially if it shows a pattern of them ignoring repair requests or behaving inappropriately.
You got it. And speaking of repairs, if there are any existing maintenance issues in your unit, document those as well.
Okay.
Take photos, videos, even write detailed descriptions of the problems.
So if there's a leaky...
Exactly. That documentation will be crucial if you end up arguing that the landlord created an uninhabitable environment.
Right.
And this next step is super important. Send your landlord a written notice outlining those maintenance issues and give them a reasonable time to address them.
So you're not just moving out and claiming constructive eviction.
Right.
You're giving them a chance to actually fix things.
Right. California law requires tenants to give landlords a reasonable opportunity to cure those habitability issues.
So you've documented everything. You've sent a formal notice.
Yeah.
What if the landlord still doesn't budge? What's the next step?
This is where it gets real. Time to lawyer up.
Okay.
Seriously, don't wait until the situation escalates further. As soon as you suspect something's wrong, seek legal counsel.
And I'm guessing just any lawyer won't do.
Yeah.
You need someone specializing in tenant rights and wrongful eviction cases.
Absolutely. An experienced attorney will know the ins and outs of California's tenant protection laws and can guide you through the often complex legal process. They'll help you understand your options, build a strong case, and advocate for your rights in court.
It's like having a legal superhero on your side.
Exactly. They'll fight for you and make sure you're not being taken advantage of.
Okay.
Now, alongside seeking legal counsel, there are a few other practical things you can do to prepare for a potential eviction battle.
Okay. I'm taking notes. What else should we be doing?
Start by familiarizing yourself with your local tenant rights resources. Many cities and counties have organizations that provide free legal aid or advice to tenants facing eviction.
So even if you can't afford a private attorney, there might be free help available.
Exactly. There are also online resources like websites and forums where you can find information about tenant rights and connect with others who have gone through similar experiences.
So it's like a support group for people navigating the eviction minefield.
It can be really helpful, especially if you're feeling isolated or overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Sharing your story and learning from others can be really empowering.
Totally. There's strength in numbers, and knowing you're not alone in this fight can make a huge difference. So what else can people do to protect themselves?
Well, this might seem obvious, but it's worth emphasizing. Be a good tenant.
Okay.
Pay your rent on time. Keep your unit clean and in good condition. Be respectful of your neighbors and the property.
So don't give the landlord any ammunition to use against you.
Exactly. The more you can demonstrate that you're a responsible tenant, the stronger your position will be if an eviction dispute arises.
Okay. Being a good tenant check.
Yeah.
Anything else?
This might sound a bit counterintuitive, but don't be afraid to negotiate with your landlord.
Okay.
If you're facing financial hardship, or if there are extenuating circumstances that are contributing to a potential eviction, try to have an open and honest conversation with your landlord.
So instead of just waiting for the eviction notice to hit, try to proactively work things out.
Exactly. You might be surprised at how willing landlords can be to work with tenants who are communicative and demonstrate a willingness to find solutions.
That's a really great reminder that communication is key. Even if it feels uncomfortable, having that conversation could potentially prevent things from escalating to a full-blown eviction.
Absolutely. And even if you do end up in court, demonstrating that you tried to resolve the issue amicably can work in your favor.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Document everything.
Yeah.
Get a lawyer. Know your local resources. Be a good tenant, and don't be afraid to negotiate. Did I miss anything?
I think you covered it all beautifully.
Okay.
The key is to be proactive, informed, and to remember that you have rights as a tenant. Don't let fear or intimidation prevent you from asserting those rights.
Amazing advice. Okay, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some real-life examples of wrongful evictions and discuss some additional resources, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far.
Okay.
I'm really starting to see how understanding these laws and procedures can empower tenants to stand up for themselves and fight back against these unfair evictions. What are your thoughts?
I completely agree. I think knowledge is power, and in this situation, it's absolutely essential for tenants to arm themselves with information.
We've spent this whole episode unpacking wrongful eviction in California.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, it can feel really overwhelming.
It can.
But I think knowing your rights is the first step to feeling less powerless in these situations.
Absolutely. And one thing that I think helps is seeing how these legal concepts actually play out in real life.
Okay.
The sources you shared actually have some pretty compelling stories that I think really bring it all home.
Okay, story time. Hit me with an example that'll resonate with our listeners.
All right, imagine this. A single dad living in San Francisco working 2 jobs to make ends meet.
Okay.
He's been in his apartment for years, no issues. But then a new landlord buys the building and immediately starts pressuring tenants to move out.
Okay, this sounds like trouble. What does this new landlord do?
Well, first they start neglecting repairs.
Okay.
The dad reports a leaking roof, broken heater, nothing gets fixed. Then the landlord starts making comments about wanting to attract a different kind of tenant.
Yikes. That's setting off some alarm bells. Sounds like a textbook case of harassment.
Right.
And creating an uninhabitable environment to force people out.
Exactly. And things escalate when the dad joins a tenants' rights group that's organizing in the building.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly, he's slapped with a notice to vacate for some minor lease violation he's never even been warned about before.
Classic retaliation tactic.
Yeah.
So what does the dad do? Does he just give up and move?
Thankfully, no. He remembers what we've been talking about.
Okay.
He documents every interaction with the landlord, including those comments about wanting different tenants.
Smart.
Then he contacts a legal aid organization specializing in tenant rights.
Team lawyer rides in. What happens next?
Well, with the lawyer's help, the dad files a response to the eviction notice,
Right.
arguing that the landlord's actions are retaliatory and part of a pattern of harassment. They present all that meticulously collected evidence, showing the neglect of repairs and the timing of the eviction notice.
So it's not just his word against the landlord's.
Right.
He has proof to back it up.
Exactly. And this is where those specific legal procedures we talked about earlier become so important.
Right.
The landlord can't just make stuff up.
Right.
They have to prove they had a legitimate reason for the eviction and followed the proper steps.
So what's the outcome of the case? Does the single dad manage to stay in his home?
He does. The court rules in his favor, recognizing the landlord's actions as retaliatory and a violation of his tenant rights.
Wow.
Not only does he get to stay in his apartment,
That's amazing.
but the landlord is also ordered to make those long overdue repairs and pay the dad's legal fees.
That's a huge victory. It shows how powerful it can be to understand your rights, document everything, and get legal help.
Absolutely. This isn't just a hypothetical scenario either.
Right.
These kinds of wins happen all the time thanks to those strong tenant protections in California.
It's truly inspiring.
Yeah.
So we've got the legal knowledge, the practical steps, and now a real-life example showing that it is possible to fight back and win. What's like the final message you'd want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing is to remember that you're not alone in this.
Yeah.
If you're facing a potential eviction, especially one that feels wrong or unfair, reach out for help. Talk to a legal aid organization, connect with a tenant rights group, even just share your story with someone who understands.
It's all about community and finding those people who can offer you support and guidance.
Exactly. And never underestimate the power of knowledge. The more you understand your rights as a tenant, the better equipped you'll be to navigate these challenging situations.
Well said. Thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive into the world of wrongful eviction in California.
Of course.
It's been eye-opening and empowering, and honestly, a bit of a relief to know that tenants do have options.
They'll do. Thanks again.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Remember, folks, you have rights. Don't be afraid to assert them.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.